Alright, so now that Digimon Survive has been out for more than a month and a half at this point, I do now feel comfortable putting out a full review for you guys, especially since we've done the Wrathful Ending on screen, and I had a lot of fun with the Let's Play. That said, since the game has been out for a while now, I did figure doing a spoiler-free review would be a little bit boring, so in this review we're going to be going elbows deep into Digimon Survive and discussing whether or not I think the game is worth buying. Through this review, we're going to be going over the game's story, which includes its branching paths, but mostly focusing on the Wrathful Ending since it was my first playthrough. We'll also be discussing the gameplay mechanics and of course the Digimon roster. So with that being said, make sure to sit back, relax, subscribe for more Digimon and monster taming content, and let's dive in. Alright, so what is Digimon Survive and what isn't Digimon Survive? What it is a visual novel tactical RPG hybrid with roughly a 70-30 split between the two, favoring the former. The game's not an adventure RPG or a Fire Emblem game or anything like that. It's literally a visual novel with tactical combat to spice up battles that take place in between story segments. The story itself is not Lord of the Rings, but instead focuses on more of an anime/manga approach with the escalating power levels and stakes and stuff like that. Our story begins with a group of teenagers going to camp when they're accidentally swept up into this alternate world inhabited by mysterious creatures known as Kemonogami, which you'll know as Digimon. Each of the characters have their own unique quirks, but generally speaking, the cast is as follows. Takuma, the player character and sort of true leader figure. Minoru, the laid-back class clown with a good heart. Ryo, the delinquent who's actually a huge wuss. Saki, the bubbly girl who's masking a trauma. Aoi, the class president who puts a lot of the burdens on herself, and finally Shuji, the smart nerdy kid who can never meet his parents' expectations. We also have two more characters that get thrown into the mix due to them living in the area, being Kaito, the violent, angsty guy who can be depended on but also has a very strange asphyxiation with his little sister, and that little sister is Miu, whom is quirky and immature and sort of acts as the young one of the group. As expected, much like a typical anime, you have a lot of characters that lean very heavily into their specific distinctions. I wouldn't say that the characters are one-dimensional, but for the most part they aren't super deep either. Anyways, the group ends up in this strange world and are eventually met by their own Digimon, or again as are referred to in game, Kemonogami, whom have apparently been waiting for them but don't really know why themselves. It's more of an instinct. The group then begins to search for a way home, which ultimately leads them to saving the world. You'll notice a lot of similarities between this game and Digimon Adventure, specifically the first iteration of it, and that's very much intentional. It is, however, by no means a carbon copy, and death is lurking within this mysterious world. To make a long story short, there's essentially this strange fog that is encompassing the world and threatening to destroy it, and anyone who enters the fog can and will be killed. To further add confusion to this, the group is also being hunted down by evil Digimon that are following a mysterious figure known as the Master and want to sacrifice them for some type of strange ritual that allegedly will stop the world from collapsing. As each chapter progresses, you learn more and more about the world that you're in and strengthen the bond between you and your Digimon. The plot is constantly taking the group from place to place, whether it be simply trying to get on top of a radio tower in order to maybe get a signal, to downright storming the enemy lair in order to beat answers out of the enemies. There is constant infighting present within the group as well, which is to be expected when you take a bunch of teenagers and put them into a very high stress situation, and oftentimes this infighting leads to characters getting demoralized, which ultimately leads to their death. As these different conflicts unfold, you'll be given 3 options of dialogue during certain points in the game, which will affect your character's karma stat. Karma can be broken down into wrath, harmony, and moral, though I did feel like at times the choices made didn't really match the karma given, and ultimately a lot of the choices didn't really matter until late game anyway. What I mean by this is sometimes you'll be suggesting something that the game doesn't really want you to do, which will give you karma in, let's say, the wrathful stat, but the characters will be like, hey, yeah, we're not going to do that, and your character will be like, my bad, my bad. It's a trap that a lot of games fall into where they ask the character player a yes or no question, like, will you help me complete the Pokedex? And if you say no, they're going to be like, oh, come on, let me ask you again. And you just have a yes or no dialogue choice for absolutely no reason. Again, Digimon's not too bad for this because while in the short term the choice really didn't make much of a difference, it does have ramifications in the long term, but it can still be rather frustrating nonetheless. Another critique I have of the game's story, before we get into some of the Wrathful Ending specific stuff, is that while I understand the characters are teenagers, I do feel like they put way too much emphasis in really personal issues while their lives were on the line. Like, characters would literally put themselves and everyone else in danger over the stupidest things, and I did feel it was kind kind of aggravating at times. Anyways, the Wrathful Ending of the game was actually pretty epic, with it forcing the death of Saki and completely demoralizing Aoi, which ends up turning her into this completely unhinged fusion Digimon, which acts as a god and ultimately causes her to become the main antagonist. Her goal was to make everything one and absorb everyone into herself. This includes both the Kemonogami realm and the normal world in order to stop all suffering. It turns out she absorbed the ability to open the gate between worlds, and even in defeat, the gate stays open and slowly expands forever. The game ends in a brave new world where Digimon and humans must coexist because of the massive size of the portal, and it almost becomes post-apocalyptic in that it's a chaotic place where people are being arrested for having Digimon partners and others are using them for evil. Within the chaos exists a team dedicated to helping those with Digimon partners and fighting evil, that being the survivors of your group. I think this ending is really cool and would make for an awesome spin-off game or sequel. Overall, I really enjoyed Digimon Survive. Again, it's not Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, but if you're a fan of anime and don't mind playing a visual novel, you'll definitely have some enjoyment here. The game does technically have 5 endings total, with one of them admittedly being kind of like a game over ending, and one of the others only being available in New Game Plus. But as I started to work towards playing the other endings, I'm just sitting here thinking like, damn, I really like the concept behind the story, even if at times it can be a little annoying. I mean, maybe I'm just a psycho, but I was actively hoping certain characters would die because they were kind of killing the vibe. Speaking of character death, another criticism I do have, despite what I just said, is that in the first run, no matter what you do, you cannot save Ryo or Shuji. They will always die, and the game will even kind of taunt you at the end, saying if their affinity was higher, you could have maybe saved them, even though that's not the case. I honestly didn't like these characters that much, and honestly, when they died, it kind of made the vibe better. But when we're talking about a game with player choice, I do think that that should be a major component. All right, so let's talk about the gameplay and the tactical aspect. So during the visual novel portion of the game, whether it be in exploration mode or free action mode, both involve pointing and clicking on stuff. You can use your phone to uncover hidden items in Digimon battles, and you can communicate with other characters to build up their affinity during non-progressive sections. You can also enter free battle mode, which will allow you to encounter Digimon enemies in order to gain XP to strengthen your team. Speaking of which, the game's battle segments take place in a tactical combat setting, with you using various Digimon you've recruited on your adventure against one another, with oftentimes multiple Digimon enemies to overcome. The combat is by no means overly complex, and I'd say it's very friendly to newcomers to the tactical RPG genre, with Digimon only really having one move when unequipped, and it being very straightforward overall. Digimon all have a speed stat, which determines who moves first. They all have a movement stat, which determines how far they can move. They have a stat for vertical movement, which determines how high they can jump, etc. Every move has a range in which it can hit an enemy from, and then an area effect, with most of them only affecting one square, but in the end game, you see some moves that have massive ranges as well. You can also attack from the high ground for an increased critical hit ratio, as well as hit enemies from the side or back for increased damage. You can also activate various buffs by using your teammates to boost morale, which differ based on the character you're using. Minoru, for example, is my favorite since he greatly increases movement speed for an ally or himself. Generally, the goal is to vanquish all enemies on the opposing team, which is simple enough. So it's a given that you'll be able to control various partner Digimon within the game, but when it comes to recruiting enemies, you have a Shin Megami Tensei-esque recruitment mechanic where they can ask questions, and if you answer the way they like, they'll have a chance of joining your team. This actually ends up being Digimon specific, so it can be exploited quite easily, which I mean is a good or bad thing depending on what you're looking for. Later in the game, some of them only have like a 12% chance, even if you've answered everything correctly, so the fact that you know the same answers will always be right on the same Digimon is kind of good in that case. In terms of the game's evolution system, you can evolve your partner Digimon mid-battle, which is really cool, but comes with some downsides like extra stamina loss, or you can permanently digivolve your recruited Digimon via items found within the game, which has the advantage of not being stamina draining, but also has the disadvantage of lasting forever, so you can't go backwards if you maybe prefer a pre-evolution. Honestly, evolving Digimon is one of my favorite things to do in this game. There's a ton of branching options and it never gets old. Progression-wise, the game never really felt like it had a massive difficulty spike, but it does encourage you to go into free battle a little bit here and there just to level up. There's also various items that you can equip to your Digimon in order to buff certain aspects of them or increase experience earned, so you never really have to sit and grind for a long time either. Overall, I, as someone who hasn't actually really played any tactical RPGs outside of this game, really enjoyed the combat, and while some of you might say that it's really easy, if you are a veteran to the genre, you can also up the difficulty to hard mode or even bring it down to easy depending on your playstyle. Next up, we're going to be talking about the Digimon roster, which isn't massive, and many Digimon are the result of evolving from one another, so that brings down the amount of lines further. But if you do want a full list of the Digimon roster, you can check out this video linked below. I will say overall that I really do like the Digimon present within the game, as I feel like a lot of them call back to Digimon Adventure, which the game does take heavy inspiration from. Some longtime Digimon fans who never really fell off might feel that this is too much fan fan service for the filthy casuals, much like a lot of Pokemon fans feel that Kanto's pushed too much, so I can definitely get that argument. Either way, you have some really cool Digimon present within the game, and if you are someone who hasn't been into Digimon since the original anime run from the 90s, you'll still recognize a big chunk of the roster. But yeah guys, honestly, I really enjoyed my playthrough, and while I have seen a lot of people argue that the game is a visual novel and shouldn't cost full price, to me that's like arguing any genre of game you don't like specifically should cost less, and that could be a slippery slope. Oh, that game is a Metroidvania, it shouldn't cost full price. Oh, that game has farming, it shouldn't cost full price. Oh, that game's a first-person shooter, it shouldn't be full price. All of these arguments are based off of your own personal preference. The bottom line is that if this style of game is for you, you could easily get anywhere from 40 to 80 hours out of it, which is honestly a lot more than some AAA games can even say. So personally, I think it is worth your time if this type of game is for you. If this type of game isn't for you, and you don't want to read dialogue and you don't care about the story, this game's not worth it for you. But yeah, with all that being said, if you are a fan of Digimon or just monster taming games in general, definitely feel free to subscribe to my channel because I put out daily monster taming content. You can also check out my Discord, my Twitter, and my Patreon, all links below. And I just want to say special thanks to the patrons, especially Jim Hamilton, Drogos, Exodus, and Dark Persona. And with that, we'll see you guys next time. Peace.